Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Family Couch. Today I am so excited to have on our show Mallory Grimste. Thank you so much for being on with us today. And we're going to be talking about an amazing topic, a topic that I actually really enjoy talking about, which is teens, and just kind of how to navigate that whole wonderful 10 years of life that you have with your kid when they are a teenager. So Mallory, tell us a little bit more about yourself and what you do.
Sure. So my name is Mallory Grimste, and I'm a teen therapist in Woodbridge, Connecticut. And basically, I help anxious teens feel better and more comfortable with any sort of big emotions that they're having, whether that means like improving their self-esteem, getting more connected to what they're feeling and thinking for themselves, or being able to manage and effectively communicate what their thoughts and feelings are, because they're very, very good at telling you, but it's not always very effective. Yeah.
I think a lot of parents can relate to that part of it, where it's like they feel a lot, not great at telling me in appropriate ways how they're feeling.
Yes. Yeah. There are definitely some kids where you kind of have to guess what they're feeling, but they're feeling something.
Yeah. So, I think the idea of having teens kind of has this negative kind of cloud over. People always dread the teenage years. People are scared of the teenage years. And so tell us a little bit about what you found or what you've come to understand about teenagers, and maybe why you think that negative cloud kind of is over them so much.
Yeah, well, I think, I talk with my teen girls. I have a teen girls group, and I talk with them a lot about how, and they talk with me a lot about the same thing, about how sarcasm is kind of their language. So there's already kind of negativity already built into their natural way of communicating.
Right.
I sound like a scientist, but so I think that has some to do with it. And I also think when you are just going through so many big life changes and biochemistry changes, like I remember not entirely loving being a teenager when I was a teen.
Right.
When I look back on it now, I really didn't have it as bad as I thought I did.
Right.
And that does seem to be a theme, even with the teens that I am working with, over and over again. And so, I think that just has a lot to do with it. It's just kind of where they are in life and not having the skills or ability to see the long-term picture about it and how to say what you're feeling.
Right. And I agree with that. I think, mostly because teens kind of have this whole what is happening to me cloud over them, that it begins to come out in everything that they do, the way that they see the world, the way that they express themselves. Even, I would say, even the people that they choose to hang around kind of has a huge influence on what they're feeling internally.
Oh, definitely. For sure.
Yeah.
And everybody else is all negative and this sucks. This sucks too.
Yeah.
And then you're like, it's not so bad. Nobody wants to be the oddball when you're the teen.
No. And that's a huge part of this stage though, right? This kind of identity and role confusion and trying to figure it out. So what I would say is this: as a parent, right, when you're working with the parents or you're trying to help the parents understand, how do you help the parent understand that you have a kid that pretty much for a decade is trying on different identities, throwing them off as quickly as they're putting them on, and the parents trying to keep up with where their kid is? How do you help with that?
So when I work with parents, I work with them in a few different ways. For my individual clients, we actually have quarterly check-in treatment meetings where the parents are there in the treatment room, where the kid is talking about how they're feeling, and they're able to give that feedback right there directly. With my group clients, I actually send out a weekly newsletter to them that tells them not necessarily what we did or talked about in group, but the skill that they learn so that they can incorporate that themselves. And honestly, I think that's probably the biggest piece of it, is the things that I'm teaching the teenagers. If the parents don't know about that, or they need to be reminded of that, it's hard to reinforce that at home.
Yeah. Yeah. Because you have a kid that's kind of going through a lot of things. So in a group with you, it's easier to kind of talk about. But at home, there's so many other factors and distractions going on that it's difficult to keep up with that skill and to keep practicing that skill.
Yeah, and a lot of times parents are usually doing a pretty good job of this already.
Yeah.
And I try to remind them that it's a little bit different for me. I'm only seeing their kid usually once a week for a very small portion, and it's a very defined relationship. And I totally understand that it's very different when you're living with them day in and day out and night after night. I remember very well when I worked at a group home for teenage girls, I was the weekend house manager, which meant that I literally was there. I will never forget this shift. It was from 11 a.m. on Saturday mornings through 6 p.m. on Sunday nights. And there were times where I was like, wanted to just crawl into a hole and cry. And it's just having to remind myself and the parents that a lot of times it's not really about you. It's them trying to tell you that this doesn't feel good. And sometimes even when you're like, I got it, they're still trying to tell you.
Right. So I guess the question then becomes, what does that process look like? Like if you're a parent and you have a kid that you're like, I get it. I see that you're upset. I'm with you, but the kid is just kind of going in, just really going in with maybe not being appropriate with their expression or continuing to kind of spiral because they don't know how to stop or they don't know when to stop. How do you kind of help a teen and maybe even their parent figure out, okay, you've expressed your emotion. Now, where do we go next?
Yeah, I think it's, I'd say it's probably like a threefold process.
Okay.
I think, on the parents' end, I think that it's really important for them to have a really good boundaries about their own responses and emotional levels. And if they are able to check in and regulate for themselves, that's really good for the teen to experience. And sometimes setting that boundary of, I'm too upset, or I'm seeing that you're too upset. We can't have this conversation right now. It's really, really important. The thing that I think that people tend to either willfully or not forget about is that the other part of that is coming back when you both are in a calm space and addressing it. It's a lot. I think it's very comfortable for people to think, well, I'm good and they're good right now. I don't want to disrupt this right now.
Yes.
But it continues to grow.
And I think you hit it right on the head there where it's, okay, we've talked about it. Everyone's cool. Let's move forward. But for teenagers, I think sometimes it's like that first discussion is just the beginning of them really integrating and understanding that emotion or that event.
Yeah. And honestly, it doesn't always have to be like this really deep heart-to-heart conversation. I think people think because we talk about it in therapy, that when they talk about it at home, it has to be this really intense experience or conversation. But it could literally be as simple as hey, when you called me the B word, I really didn't appreciate that. Please don't do that again. And just keep it moving.
And I agree with that. I think sometimes, adults in teens' lives feels like everything has to be a Saturday morning special or a Saturday morning lesson, where it's like, we're going to talk about emotions today, and it's like, I think and you can tell me if this is the right thinking, but I think sometimes what teens need is just to be treated like they are normal, whatever that means. Like they are just this is just part of the everyday fabric of life. And I think that sometimes adults in the kids' lives, whether it be parents or caregivers, tend to take it and make it kind of more grandiose, which kind of adds to the fears and some of the emotions that the kid is having.
Yeah. One of the other things, just to piggyback off of that for a second, is that I try to remind parents in particular about is, as adults, we have a lot of life experience and knowledge, and we want to protect the kid. And I find myself even in that mode too, where I start getting into lecture mode, and I have to catch myself and be like, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to start talking at you. But if you can catch that, it's going to happen because I do it too. But if you can catch that and try to be mindful of speaking more from an I perspective versus I'm telling you kind of a thing, it makes a huge world of difference. if you start saying like, when I get angry, I find, splashing my face with the water helps cool me down. Like, have you tried that?
Right.
And just come from like a curious mindset rather than like, well, go take a walk.
Right. Right. Right.
Yeah.
And again, I think
teenagers do not like to be told what to do.
But I think it's because they're kind of starting to come into their identities. And I think that as adults, we don't want to be told what to do. If I tell you my life is falling apart and you say, well, it'll get better, it's like, okay, thank you, but
yeah.
And I would love for you to talk a little bit about, you touched on it, but to talk about this need sometimes for us to want to protect teenagers or want to protect our young kids from what's going on. Like, how do you kind of navigate that and work through that?
Yeah, I think it's different for everybody. I think when you really love and care for somebody, like obviously you don't want them to feel bad. You don't want them to hurt. And so, we do things every day to protect ourselves. I hope everybody's like putting their seatbelt on in the car. It is the law.
Right.
So we do that sort of thing. We lock our doors when we're home for the evening. We do these things that protect ourselves in these physical ways. And we try to do that in emotional ways too. Though sometimes I think that it's okay to feel uncomfortable emotions as long as they don't spiral out of control.
Yeah.
I often have the conversation with some of my clients and their families that like, hey, if you really did call this girl all these mean names and now you're feeling bad about it, I don't think that's anxiety or depression. I think that's just your body and your mind telling you like, hey, that wasn't a great choice. You should feel bad about that.
I agree. And I think that that's something that to talk to our kids about, that when they have bad emotions, that sometimes it doesn't always necessarily mean you have a diagnosis of any sort, but that it might just be a result of a decision you made that maybe didn't sit too well with who you are or who you want to be.
Yeah. And I think for kids, like not having that language, I'm using kids in a very expansive way, like the under 18 crowd.
Right.
Sometimes a little above.
Right.
But if you don't have the language or the realization that it's okay not to feel great all the time, sometimes it's a little more comfortable to like not take responsibility for that and say, well, that's just my anxiety. And sometimes it is, but sometimes it just means you made a really negative choice for yourself.
As you were talking about that whole kind of experience, I was thinking about the movie Inside Out and how Joy wanted, Riley to feel good the whole time. And the other motion was like, hey, we're here too. Like, it's great to be happy, but I also feel sad or angry or fearful. I really loved, I always go back to that movie because I feel like it was a really good experience of, yes, we want our kids and our teens to feel happy, but they also have a lot of other stuff going on in their bodies and in their minds.
Yeah, and sometimes they don't know what it is.
Yes, which I think is where we get frustrated as the adults in their lives, where we're like, what is wrong with you? And they're like, I don't know, I'm just going to slam a door and not talk and not eat, but I don't know what it is. So how do you, let's talk about that. How do you help parents kind of navigate those I don't knows and I don't cares and everything sucks? How do you help them navigate that so that way they can help their kids, their teens?
Yeah, so I assume this is not just happening here in Connecticut, but the two phrases that I probably hear the most often when I ask a question that somebody is not feeling ready to answer or doesn't know quite how to answer is I don't know or I don't care.
Yep.
And those aren't necessarily accurate responses. They're just very easy to say. And so usually with the I don't knows, I clarify with them, like, do you truly not know, or are you telling me I don't want to talk about this right now? Because those are two very different things. And if you're having like memory stuff, we got to like look into that.
Right.
And usually they're like, I just don't want to talk about it. I said, okay, say that next time.
Right.
And then with the I don't cares, usually that's like a way to just shut down a conversation. And half the time, like I'm not asking about their level of caring. So I'll usually just reflect back like, good to know. I didn't ask that though.
Right.
I go back to the original question.
Right. Right. And I think those are really good kind of ideas, because I think sometimes as a parent, and again, you know how I talk about like the shame, parents feel like they're doing too much. They don't want to be helicopter parents, so they'll back off. But I really like this idea where you kind of reflect back to your kid, even outside of the therapy, even if you're just at home with your kid, where you're like, well, which one is it? I don't know, or I don't want to talk about it. I didn't ask about not caring. I asked, how was your day at school?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Because those are very different questions.
Right. Right.
And
right.
honestly, I think it is a little bit of a setup for parents sometimes. And I don't think that teens are meaning to set their parents up, and like, sometimes they're looking for an argument, but I don't think it's as often as we'd like to give them credit for that. So like when they respond, I don't know, it's very easy and normal for the parents or the helpers to kind of get into this problem solving mindset, like, well, let's figure this out.
Right.
And if they're really saying, I don't want to talk about it, and then here you are still trying to talk about it, now you've got a whole distraction going on, and like you still don't know what's going on.
Right.
Versus like if they're really meaning, I don't want to talk about this right now, you can say, okay, well, let's talk about this like after dinner, or I don't know, whenever.
Right. So what are some of the common reasons why, and again, these are just things that you found, why kids sometimes don't want to talk about it?
Oh, I think like probably one of the biggest things is embarrassment. Or sometimes I often find that teenagers are either worried about their parents' reactions in terms of like that they're going to get in trouble or treated differently, or they're worried about their parents' reactions in terms of, can they handle this? Or I don't want to hurt them. And it's really not their responsibility to be protecting the parents. The parents are really meant to help protect the teens.
Right. And so with those ones, let's say like if you realize that maybe your kid is trying to protect you, how would a parent kind of change that child's understanding or that teen's understanding of what their role is in the family?
Honestly, I think just having the conversation directly.
So saying, hey, I'm the one who's the adult here. Whatever you tell me is something that we can work through together, or that I'll kind of try to handle if it's too much for you, like actually letting your kid know what their role is, maybe.
Yeah. And I think, I think as therapists, we have this wonderful gift of knowledge of how to have these conversations. And like, the more you do it, like I'm so comfortable with like these like intense emotional conversations that sometimes families are like, this doesn't stress you out. And I'm like, oh no.
Exactly. Exactly.
But for families, I mean, it can be very, very intense, and it doesn't often end when the therapy session ends. I mean, you get into the car and you drive off together. If you're taking the car, or like if you're walking back wherever you're going, wherever the deal is. You don't just like, okay, therapy's over, we're just never going to address this.
Right. Yeah. And I think that that's something kind of that you kind of brought up, which is this idea of parents also learning that emotional vocabulary or that emotional language, so that way they can kind of help. Because I think you are right when kids are like, well, I don't think my parents can handle it, right? They know their parents are adults, but at the same time, I think, and this is something that I really stress with my parents, is that sometimes the way that you portray your own life makes your kid think that you haven't had much issue or much hardship, or everything's just been very easy for you. And you have a 15-year-old who's struggling with how to make life decisions. And they're feeling like, oh, mom is so good at everything, she wouldn't know how it feels to be, to make a bad decision. Right?
Yeah. I think that's very, very true. And, I think it's also hard when, like, I work with the teenagers directly, and I try to have very good boundaries about that I'm the teen's client, I'm not the parents. Or, I mean, the teen is my client, that the parents are not my client. I do work with the parents in terms of how it benefits the teen, but sometimes I will sometimes recommend to different parents that they could also benefit from doing some of their own work in counseling.
Yep.
And that's not a bad thing. I honestly think everybody should.
I agree.
At least once in life.
I agree.
Not more.
I agree. And you know why I agree? I agree because I always talk to my parents about their own identity as a parent, that, you have a humanness and an identity that you've been cultivating far longer than you've had a child, so you have to constantly continue to cultivate these. And I think, and you probably know this too, that teens tend to bring out the pieces of ourselves that we thought we had got all figured out, but a teen will say something or they'll do something and you'll instantly be brought back to a time when maybe you didn't have it all figured out. And that can be scary if you're not having your own space to talk about things.
Yeah.
Right?
And they have a way of like unearthing things that you're like, I haven't thought about that in like 20 years.
Yes. Yes. Because they're living it. They're living it. And it's making you're like, well, I've already been 15. But then your 15-year ago something, you're like, right. I remember when I did that. And it's so scary, especially if it's something that wasn't great or something that you don't want to remember. It can be really scary to be brought back to that period of your life, watching your kid go through it.
Yeah, it's very, very true.
Right. Right. And so I'll say this, and one of the things that I'm sure doesn't just happen in Southern California, I'm sure it happens where you are too, is this idea of technology and how kids are kind of, again, I think you and I might be more okay with technology, but at the same time, we grew up without it for the most part. And now kids literally are always kind of tied to their phones or the device of some sort. So how do you kind of help your teens become more aware of themselves in the digital world?
Yeah, I think I don't try to make it specific just to technology because I do think it's bigger than just like the social media and everything. I think this is a new way or preferred way of communicating for a lot of the teens. But I think it ultimately comes down to healthy boundaries. And so I really try to gear it more in those directions for the teenagers and for the families. Obviously, some of that has to do with like safety, but you would also be talking about safe boundaries like, hey, don't get into a stranger's car, know?
Right. Yeah. And so when kids are sexting or maybe making inappropriate decisions while they're talking to their peers, kind of what would you say to the teen, or maybe even tips that you have for parents on how to navigate that and how to help the kid be more mindful?
I think just providing them with real life examples and education about like what is the impact of doing that. I actually I don't know if this is fortunate or not. I was going to be like, I was fortunate enough to have this experience, but it was a little stressful. And but it did stick with me. Where when I was in college, I was part of the radio station at my school, and when I was in my last year in college, I was the website manager, which is really funny because like I'm not. I think I'm like okay with that kind of stuff, but I mean. I'm not, I don't know like the ins and outs, like I don't know coding or any of that. And I thankfully just had some awesome like freshmen on my team. There was one day that the website for the radio station just completely wasn't there. And this is how I learned about the ins and outs of technology and how things stay there forever, even when you think that you've deleted them. Delete does not actually mean permanently erase.
Yes.
Because with like I was stressing out because I was like, I don't know how to rebuild a whole website. Our server went out of business, and so we had to like scramble. And there was a freshman on our team, Corey Schuster. So Corey, if you're out there, thank you. I still remember you. He within probably less than 15 minutes was like, oh, I got this, and was able to pull up every single version and modification of the website from the time that it was created to the time it went down. And that was really scary for me to see as a college student, because I was like, wait a minute. So once it's out there, it's for real out there. Like if somebody wants to find it, they will find it.
And that, I think, hearing that, and for anybody who's listening, I think that is a really eye-opening kind of experience where the whole server went down. So you're like, everything's gone forever. And that guy's like, nope, here we are. It's right here. And you're like, oh. And it kind of brings to fruition where it's like, where do my Snapchats go? Where do my snaps go? Where do these things go when I delete them? Well, they're still there if someone really wants to find them.
Yeah, there's
right?
definitely a trail.
Yeah. And I
Yeah.
think, one of the things that you'll probably agree with is that teens are not much different than they were, millennia ago. It's just we have so much more access. So can you maybe talk a little bit about why teens have that desire to maybe take part of these behaviors, even though logically they know I probably shouldn't send this picture or send this text? What do you think kind of inspires them to do that or motivates them to make those type of decisions?
Oh, I think it all comes down to wanting to be liked and feel
Mm-hmm.
connected.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Teenagers are, I mean, they're just going through so many different
Yeah.
identity changes and trying to figure
Yeah.
out, like, it's literally a time in their lives where they're figuring out who they're going to be as an adult. And so they're going to try on all sorts of different
Yeah.
personalities, and like
Yeah.
you'll see them like dressed one way one day and then the makeup's totally something
Yeah.
else, and you're
Yeah.
like, who is this kid?
Right. Right.
And so when it comes to teenagers, they tend to rely a lot on groupthink mentality,
Mm-hmm.
which means, um, what do my other peers think about this? Like, is this
Yeah.
okay? Is this not okay?
Right.
Um, and so if the norm in their friend group, like you were talking earlier about, who they spend their time with,
Yeah.
the norm in their friend group is to send like sexy pictures to each other on
Mm-hmm.
Snapchat and like think that's funny, they're likely to do that as well.
Right.
So I also think it's really important that if you have the opportunity, like your kids' friends are over at your house or you're like driving them somewhere or something, I think it's okay to have this conversation with
Yeah.
other kids
Yeah.
too.
Yeah.
Not in like a lecture sort of way, but just like, hey, did you know?
Yeah. And I really like that last kind of idea where it's like if you have the ear of your kid's peers, use it. Don't just talk to your kid, but like if they're there, everyone's hanging out, playing video games, eating food. It's like, hey guys, dropping some wisdom, walking away, letting you process it, kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I mean, just because the kids are not telling you that they're listening,
Mm-hmm.
they're totally taking it in.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it's, they will often take it in more from another adult than, or not that they'll take it in more. Let me rephrase that.
Yeah.
They will acknowledge that they're taking it in more from
Yes.
another adult
Right.
than if it's, oh, there goes mom again.
Right. Right. So
Yeah.
I think the theme here is that parents, you guys should have a network of parents where everyone says, okay, let's follow up. So if my kid's at your house, you talk to them. If your kid's at my house, I'll talk to them.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think having that support with other
Yeah.
parents is just so
Yeah.
huge.
I agree. The same way I think as it's really important for kids to have that support, but to have the support where they know that their peer group isn't going to lead them astray, I think.
Yes.
Right. Because that I think I agree with you. I think that a lot of the times it's not necessarily your kid is just thinking that this is the right thing to do. It's just that everyone, again, we know all about peer pressure, right? That everyone else is kind of doing it and I don't want to be left out or I don't want to seem a certain way or seem this way. So I do it. And I think, that's something that kind of happens to them.
Yeah, it also helps give kids an out if you're known to be the mom that's like, or the dad or whoever who's like, hey, sexting is not great.
Yeah. Yeah.
That if that kid is now being asked to send a picture like that, they're like, guys, my mom or dad, how they feel about this.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not about to get in trouble for that.
Right. Right.
It lets them save face instead of just having to bear that totally on their own. And I mean, as they grow older, hopefully they'll be able to learn how to do that and navigate that. But as a teenager, I mean, they're just under so much pressure. Like, if you
Right.
can help give them an out and like be the bad guy for a minute, like,
Right.
I
And I
think
really
go
like
for
that.
it.
Yeah. And I really like that idea, but that means that you
Yeah.
have to talk to them. You have to know what pressures they're having and what things people are tending to ask of them without judgment. I think immediately when you find out my friends are sexting, it's, oh, you don't need to hang out with them anymore. Right. Where it's like, where that's probably not realistic. If these are the peer group they've chosen, I like your idea of it's probably better than to say, get away from Mallory. Then it probably is easier to say, you know what, if Mallory says this again, you can just blame it on me. Say, my mom will take my phone, can't do it. Like it gives them an out and it gives them a way to still be connected to that peer group, even though you don't love those people, but they can still start to learn how to navigate maybe those peer groups a little bit more effectively.
Yeah. And hopefully, they'll, help ignite like a positive shift for that peer group too.
Right.
Not that they should have to be the one to do that. I don't think anybody should have to be taking on that pressure.
Right.
But it's a nice way to look at it. And usually I like to think if a kid or even an adult is acting in a way that's a little like questionable, it's easy to kind of like withdraw and be like, I don't want to be part of that.
Right.
But that's usually the time where they really need people to kind of like push in and put the pressure on about like, hey, there's a better way.
Yeah. And I think giving your kid that out allows them to still be in that peer group like that, right? Where they get to maybe say to their friends, hey man, like I get my stuff taken away. What happens when you do stuff like that? And that friend might be like, well, my parents don't do anything. And I think that's a good red flag for that peer to know, okay, this person might need more help, right?
Yeah.
This person might need more support.
Yeah.
Right?
I would say so.
Yeah. And I would say that I think we have so much to talk about when it comes to teens, and you obviously have a wealth of information and examples, but I definitely want to give you a space to let our audience know more about how they can connect with you or learn more about what you do.
Yeah, sure. So the best way to reach me is at my website, which is just my name. It's MalloryGrimste.com. And I'll spell it out because I know it's a little funky. It's MalloryGrim, as in Mary, S as in Sam, T as in Tom, E as in Edward.com.
Nice.
That's the best way to get in touch with me. I'll usually have whatever like my latest offering is like right up there. And you can sign up for my mailing list. It's really easy. There's several spots if you want to get a weekly e-blast from me with some of these tips and tricks that I share that way. I also am in the process right now, probably by the time that this airs, it might be ready to like officially launch, but I'm kind of doing like a pre-launch thing for a course for parents and helpers alike on how do you survive teens. It's called Surviving Teens.
I love that. You will definitely have to let us know about that so we can share it when it goes live, because I think a lot of helpers and parents would love to know how to do just that.
Yeah, it was interesting when I was kind of doing my own little like market research, like, does this make sense? Like, do people want this? Like, I want to do it, but do they want it?
Yeah.
I was finding that a lot of helpers, whether they were therapists or teachers or somewhere in the helping profession, had a lot of the same concerns as parents. And so, why not just give it for everybody?
I love that. And for those of you who are listening, all of the links that Mallory talked about, and maybe even the Surviving Teens pre-launch will be there as well. But all of those links will be in the show notes for this episode. So if you want to connect with Mallory on her website or social media, you can have all those links and they'll be there for you.
Thanks.
Thank you so much, Mallory, for being on and sharing some of your insights and your tips and your tricks on how to kind of be in this teen era and not feel like you're drowning.
Yes. Yeah, it definitely takes a village.
Yes, definitely. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It was happy, let me say that in English. It was so great, and I had such a good time being part of this with you.
Awesome. See ya.
All right, bye.